What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast, where we bring you some zesty ideological ingredients so you can brew your own faith. And today on the podcast is Sharon Jacob. That's right, Sharon is assistant professor of New Testament at Phillips Theological Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we are talking about her book, Reading Mary Alongside Indian Surrogate Mothers, Violent Love, Oppressive Liberation, and Infancy Narratives. It's part of a pretty sweet series at Pilgrave, and it's the Bible and Cultural Studies series. We talk New Testament, we talk the history and interpretation of Mary, we talk feminist interpretations of Mary, classical interpretations of Mary, and post-colonial ones, and what it's like to read biblical narratives intersecting with contemporary narratives, and maybe a little bit about Christmas pageants. So buckle that theological safety belt, because today is gonna get nerdy. Boom! Before we jump into the podcast, I got a few things to tell you. First, Sharon Jacob teaches at Phillips Theological Seminary, regular, consistent partner of Homebrewed Christianity podcast. And guess what? I'm going to be in Tulsa this October 19th. We're doing a live podcast, October 19th, in Tulsa, Oklahoma at Marshall Brewing Company. You can get all the information and details at homebrewedchristianity.com. And guess what? Because we're partners, because we're celebrating all getting to be there, hang out, getting to connect with more of the professors, more of the students, and alumni and such. We're not just throwing a podcast and be like, hey, come get a ticket, you can come. No, Phillips Theological Seminary is going to buy everyone a pint glass and 2 pints of beer for the Homebrewed Christianity podcast, and the tickets are absolutely $0. So get yourself on over there. If you are in the Tulsa area, bring your friends and be like the first people in Oklahoma, because they just now started letting breweries sell beer. Be the first ones in Oklahoma to have a seminary buy you craft beer at a brewery in Oklahoma. You know what I'm talking about? That's better than a shiny little Surrey with the fringe on top. That's a reference to the musical Oklahoma, if you didn't know that. Those of us who did theater from middle school on know what's up. All right. Before that, on the 17th, I'll be in Montana. So if you live in Montana, which I'm sure 7 or 8 people do, I'll be there doing a lecture on violence and the cross with Eric Hall, who's writing the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to God, which comes out November 1st. Also, if you live in San Antonio and are going to the American Academy of Religion on Saturday in November, on the 19th, of American Academy of Religion in the Alamo, we're going to have a live Homebrewed Christianity podcast at Blue Star Brewing Company featuring, wait for it, Elizabeth A. Johnson, Monica Coleman, Boom Shakalaka, and Cindy Rigsby are all going to be there. There's going to be more. There's going to be more than Scott McDougall's going to be there, because he's helping me put together not just the live podcast on the 19th at Blue Star Brewing Company, but also on the 20th, if you are a member of AAR and going, we have a special session honoring the work of Elizabeth Johnson. And friends of the podcast, Catherine Keller and Austin Roberts, are all going to be delivering papers engaging her work. So that's just some of the excitement that is going on at Homebrewed. But next week, I'm going to tell you about the coolest thing that's happening. But I can't tell you yet. But if you already know, that's because you're in the group that responded when I sent out a little email. So some of you know. But the rest of you find out next week, and I'll tell you. It's going to be amazing. But the other thing to tell you right now is we just launched a giant giveaway of books, a giant set of books we're giving away. Everyone who came and spoke at Unfolding Theology, an event we put on here in California at the Hatchery, the school where I teach, we're giving away a book from everyone that spoke. That includes Philip Clayton, Amish Young, Barbara Holmes, Cindy Rigsby, Adam Clark. It was so much fun. Tom Ord was here. Keith Ward was here. Anyway, to get entered into this giveaway and to get a amazing sessions of free theological audio, just text God Talk, no spaces, to 44222 in the United States. It's God Talk without a space to 44222 in the US of A. Or go to the website and click on the giveaway. You'll be able to enter it. You'll get free amazing audio. You'll be entered in the giveaway. And every time you share the giveaway, you get entered in more. That's what I'm talking about. The giveaway is over $800 worth of goods. So do it. Last thing is, I want to tell two people thank you. That's right. David and Bruce are the newest members of the Homebrewed Christianity community. They are the group of Homebrewed members who donate each month to keep this very much listener-supported podcast going. We interact in our secret Facebook group. We have currently an Introduction to Theology group that we're going on. So if you join up, you'll be able to download the past stuff, ask questions, join live for future stuff. And then after that, we're going to be starting a series on Christology and Jesus, and then after that, there's some other things coming up. Anyway, we do quite a bit of stuff with the members, so they're not just supporting the podcast, but they're getting extra and additional content. And this week, David and Bruce joined. So thanks, David and Bruce. And if you're interested in supporting the podcast, yeah, that's right, I can talk sometimes. Supporting the podcast and becoming a member, go to homebrewedcommunity.com. All right? Here we come. Sharon Jacob reading Mary alongside Indian surrogate mothers. And if I was going to tell you a little secret, I would tell you that next week, you're going to get something super special from JC in the Homebrewed Christianity email. So if you're not on the email list, you should go to the website and get on. Next week, something special from JC delivered in your inbox. All right. It's time to nerd out. Peace. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. Today, you're going to get to hear from Sharon Jacob, who is an assistant professor of New Testament at a very fond partner of the podcast, Phillips Theological Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we're going to talk about Mary, not just Mother Mary, but all the different Mother Marys that have been in church history, what it's like to engage the infancy narratives and the image of Mary, doing some intercultural work and postcolonial thought. And it's all connected to her book, Reading Mary, alongside Indian Surrogate Mothers, Violent Love, Oppressive Liberation, and Infancy Narratives. So Sharon, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Tripp. Thank you, Tripp, for having me, and hello to all your listeners out there.
Yeah, so, and I know many of you have connected before with Josh or Marianne at Phillips in the recruiting. So now you know this is one of the professors that there. So now there's a nerd behind the logo and so.
Yes, and the nerds are very much alive and breathing and writing and thinking and debating.
So before we kind of jump into the book, maybe you could let us know a little bit exactly how someone ends up a biblical scholar who also engages in postcolonial theory.
Yeah, what an interesting question and great place to begin. So I came here for my education to do my Master's of Divinity and then went on to do my PhD. And as I was, for those of us who are in the PhD programs and trying to figure out what kind of a topic we're doing, sometimes turning on Oprah is not a bad thing. And I turned on Oprah and I came across this very interesting interview that she was doing with a couple who was in the United States and had traveled to India. They wanted to have a child and they had traveled to India and they had hired a surrogate woman to carry their child. And it really got me interested because I did not know that this was such a growing industry in India. And the more I started digging into this, and researching on it, and of course at that point nothing had been written formally. I was looking at newspaper articles and interviews. I was very, very intrigued by what I was finding when it came to the reproductive tourism industry in India. And of course, being a Bible person, I was trying to figure out how does this connect with the work that I do. I was very interested in Mary and her character in Matthew and Luke's gospel, and I found a way to read Mary through the lives of these real life women. One of my reasons for doing that was I often found that, as an Indian woman, when I read the biblical text, it's very hard for me to connect with the characters because oftentimes scholarship around those characters are talked about through lives that are not relevant to me or my social location. And so my attempt in this book was to construct a Mary that is relevant to me as an Indian woman, but not just as any Indian woman, but an Indian woman who's living in a globalized economy, who is away from home, who's an immigrant. I talk about my identity as often being developed through the boundaries of United States and India and not quite feeling at home in either of those places. And it is through those particular experiences that I began to, work on my dissertation.
Well, one of the things that I think really comes out early in the text, and maybe more progressive theologians and biblical scholars know this, is that Mary is one of the most contested characters in the history of the church. Right? Like, you kind of focus on the infancy narratives in Matthew and Luke, but if you were just to approach Mary as a topic, the politicking around women's bodies has, her body's been the primary site. So, how would you introduce what it's like to approach a character who has probably a longer shelf life outside of the New Testament, but all the weight of Mary is in Christmas pageants. It's in children's stories. It's not like Protestants escaped it, but sometimes we're unaware as to just how much baggage we carry theologically when we wrestle with Mary. So when you're going to text and you're going to a particular experience, how do you kind of start the abstraction process of or kind of parsing out and delineating all the baggage that Mary carries?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For me personally, when I started my approach on Mary, I started with her as a mother, because that is often where people land. Her image as a mother is so strong. And when you even read the scholarship that is done on Mary, that becomes a very crucial point in which scholarship itself starts to, rub up against each other, if you will. There is a lot of debate on what kind of a mother is she. Is she a mother by force? Is she a mother by choice? And I'm coming in there and saying, what if she's both? Right? So motherhood becomes a very important way for me to enter into the conversation, especially because, as you rightly said, all the images of Mary are with a child, or somewhere around a child or near a child, but it's her identity apart from the child is not known. And it's the romanticization of motherhood that I'm trying to go in there and deconstruct and dismantle. And my hope is in dismantling Mary's maternal romanticization, we're also taking a critical look at the way we understand motherhood in our own current context and the way we romanticize motherhood there.
But one of the things that comes up early in the book is how feminist and liberationist readings have always kind of advocated a more direct and conscious use of experience, right, in thinking and reflecting theologically. In one sense, it says, yes, people of privilege and males, probably overeducated ones for most of church history's experience was always involved. It just was never noticed because it was the only option in the room. And one of the things I thought that was real clear and powerful in the text is how the kind of privileged feminist response to the church's relationship with Mary isn't adequate for dealing with the experience of these surrogate mothers that you're turning to. So can you kind of describe how you understand the kind of initial feminist experience and pushback to that, and then what it's like to go, yeah, there are still other female experiences that don't have space in our account.
Right. And to me, I first of all, I have to say right up front, I don't think I would be doing the kind of work I would be doing if it wasn't for my feminist mothers and sisters who have done such incredible work around Mary, and the way in which they have come in and really tried to uplift her, and validly so. They're trying to uplift Mary from a very patriarchal context, and even in showcasing her actions, especially in the narrative, infancy narratives, as a hero or a victim, is to illustrate, or is to put up a mirror to patriarchy and say, look at the ways in which you have taken this important female figure in the text and really pushed her out into the margins, or made her into this object, and so for me that becomes my starting point. What I have a hard time, or what I want to push beyond, or push the feminist debate even further, is to start to really mess up this binary of hero and victim, and the issue of choice and consent. I want to mess that up a little bit more, because I do believe in the ancient context that Mary was living, if she was living, and if she was a real historical figure, the ancient context, or the context that she was a part of, was much more complicated for women, right? The decisions that you made, the choices that you had to make were very patriarchal driven. So in that context, to be a hero or a victim just singularly is very, very, very difficult. And I don't think that's it's that far off from the world we're living in today when it comes to women, especially women in India. And I would say women everywhere. We are living in a very confusing moment in history where decisions of our bodies, more of us as women, as mothers, as daughters, our choices are much more complex than us just taking on choices to be brave women or coward women. So it's the dichotomous nature in which we tend to define women throughout history and even in the contemporary context that my argument really wants to push. So to answer your question, then I see myself, wanting to push the feminist debate a little bit further to take into consideration the chaos of globalization, which unfortunately, at that point when my feminist sisters are writing, are not taking into consideration.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge, especially in something like biblical studies, is taking that into account. And one of the biggest assets, I think, of the text is that kind of deliberate interaction between biblical studies and all of these like real human experiences and stories that you're connecting to, and I think in one sense people may think, oh well, that's really polluting it, or it's really not listening to the power of the word, or you're inserting your agenda into the text. And in the other half of it, you're like, yeah, and this is actually the story where you hear God being called Emmanuel, God with us in Christ, which is about as getting into our story and experience as possible. So under what circumstance would you think there's a non-situated reading of this story and narrative? There's this, the infancy narratives, especially of the God that's being described, and it should be one, I think, that you would want to read contextually, and that the experiences should matter, as opposed to
I don't know, like the Christmas story tends to be one of those that looks almost exactly the same in every American church.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Like you have the children's productions, you have
and the Indian church too. I would say, like in the Indian church, it's the same way, right?
And the moments of Mary's life are always forced into some category where either like she's the model for every woman or the one exception from some rule, and we actually live those ideas out, teach it to our kids, make it nostalgic. And what I find so powerful is that in the text, it's the lives of people we're ignoring in our globe today that can open up pathways. And like when you're thinking of the narrative of Mary, like what are some of the places you go to kind of highlight just how we've ideologically loaded our normal hearing and reading of the text?
Yeah. One of the places I think for me is the Luke infancy narrative, the Lucan infancy narrative. Because, in Matthew, Joseph really takes on, he's front and center in the narrative. But in the Lucan narrative, the whole exchange that she has with the angel is very, very, very fascinating to me. Specifically because of the way in which, when she's talking to the angel, and this is where the feminist scholarship really picks up and highlights Mary, because the feminist scholarship that wants to talk about Mary as a hero will say that she made a choice about her body. She wasn't forced into it. She wasn't coerced into it, and she says, sure, I'm your slave. Let it be done to me according to your word. And to me, that becomes a very interesting, the whole idea of consent then becomes a very interesting space for me to enter and actually also use the lives of the surrogate women here. Because when it comes to the surrogate industry in India, one of the key arguments for surrogacy and for hiring surrogacy or making it a business in India is that these women are doing it because it's their choice. It's their consent. No one is forcing these women. They are becoming surrogates because, they want to help. They want to help women experience motherhood. Now, my argument against that, or my critique for that argument, when it comes to both Mary and the Indian surrogate mothers, is when you're placing this in the context in which the Lucan text is written, and also in the context of the Indian economy, where so much of having this child feeds into the hope of wanting a better future for yourself, for your people, in the case of Mary, for yourself or for your children, in the case of the surrogate mothers, then would you not participate in that hope, right? And that becomes a very real thing for me to connect these two maternal figures, one who was a real living human being in an Indian context, another who was a textual character but who has provided hope to other women, but she herself is also compromising her own body, her own maternal identity, her motherhood, her womanhood, in order to get hope for her people. So that becomes the connection for me. And the way I enter into this text. Does that help answer or get to the question that you're asking?
Yeah, and one of the things I think that is not immediately obvious, I think, when reading the text, is what it would be like to actually hear the text for the first time, or to encounter the text as a person whose body and economic existence is in a situation anything like Mary's. So by allowing the reader to kind of engage and at least start to imagine, to try to be in that situation, helps you hear the text all over again. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I thought might be helpful is for you to describe just how different that makes the Magnificat. Because in one sense, we take all the prophetic fury out of it by singing it in Latin most of the time. But there's a whole nother layer of density to it that you really bring out.
Right. I mean, again, when I read the Magnificat through the real life stories of these surrogate women, I see it more as, not just anger, but also a song of agency. And this is where I try to complicate the character of Mary even further, because the feminists who claim that Mary is a victim often write her agency out. She becomes this passive, colorless woman. And to me, when I read the Magnificat through the lens of the surrogate women, I actually see her as someone who is very bold. And she, and just like in the surrogate women's case, these are women who know that their body is being exploited by a system. And what they're going to do is they're going to take on this. They are exploiting the system as much as the system exploits them. And when you read Mary's Magnificat, through that lens, you begin to see Mary as this woman who is not just a victim, but also a hero, or as I would say, a victimized hero. She's a victimized hero who accepts her exploitation, knowing fully well that she is only participating in it, in terms of an economic exchange or an exchange that takes place between her and God. God wants her womb. She's going to give God her womb in place that, her people get freedom. So she's going to use the system as much as the system uses her. And in that sense, the Magnificat really becomes more about a song of agency. It becomes a song of defiance. It also becomes a song of, I'm going to do what I can in my power and the powers that I have to protect myself and my people and to uplift myself and my people. It's not just a song of revenge, but a song of reality that is built into this idea of revenge. So to me, it really, even when I was doing my own work and I would put the stories of the surrogate women at the side of my text and I would read it, I was oftentimes just surprised and blown away by some of the crossovers that I was seeing happening. And of course, I mean, I need to make it very clear that I'm not, the Indian surrogate women are not like Mary in one sense, because, most of them are mothers and are becoming pregnant through IVF. But on the other hand, when you just take their stories and put it in next to this text and next to Mary's character, something was really pushing at the margins and wanting to come out and speak. And that's what for me, the Magnificat does that. Yeah.
Well, do you think there's some sense that the church has turned Mary or maybe turned Theotokos into her vocation, and in making it her vocation as this exceptional female mom and this type of thing, that we don't even associate her experience with any other experience. She gets so distanced from humanity that even people who would identify with her experience aren't even given her as a sister.
Right. Yes. Thank you for naming that. Because, she almost becomes like this goddess object figure, this, who's placed on a pedestal. And even in placing her on a pedestal and making her into a goddess is, to me, equally harmful and equally oppressive. In the same way that I actually argue that the surrogate mothers are also, think of themselves as doing God's work, because they are helping women become mothers. And this cultural idea which is prevalent even in the United States as much as it is prevalent in India, that the only way a woman is truly a woman is when she experiences motherhood. So the desperation of wanting to be a mother is so much that you're willing to go to any lengths to become a mother, because that's the cultural pressure. So these women, the surrogate women, really believe that they're doing God's work. It's almost as if also that the industry then turns them into these kind of goddess figures. In the same way that we do with Mary, we take her, this woman, female character, and make her into this goddess figure, so much so, to become so much of a goddess figure that she completely separates from the lives of real women. So and a lot of the feminist scholarship has already critiqued that, and has tried to go in and talk about these ways in which we need to see Mary as a woman who we can connect with, and we can connect with, and we can relate to, versus this goddess figure who's somewhere up there that only leads to, her body being elevated and the rest of us as women feeling really crappy about ourselves because we will never be good enough as Mary. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost like turning women against other women, in order to keep the divide going.
Well, one of the things that the kind of narratives around surrogate mothers brings up is the ability to communicate those insights as a minister without really telling the stories themselves. And I read the book and I came across an article in one of the LA ministers meetups that they sent out to everybody, like, anyone ever thought about this? And it was really around how in LA, the turn towards sex work and the sex work industry in LA for people of privilege who come here and don't make it in the industry is rather high. And if you come to LA and you're wanting to stay here long enough to eventually get in the industry or whatever, then having a $4,000 a month 70-year-old as your boyfriend is a price some are willing to pay. And what does that mean for us when, the market exists, no one's forcing anyone into it, but no one would say, hey, it's a good idea? So that is a similar, I think, complicated way in which the bodies of people then get purchased with this self-slavery type of concept that you talk about.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that actually drew me to also post-colonial work, is the way in which colonialism, especially even in the Indian context, when it came to British colonialism, how colonialism worked, right? The British imperial system worked because it was a way of convincing Indian people during the colonial period that we're consenting to our own subjugation, and it was kind of a consent to being colonized. In the same way that these surrogate mothers. So I try to actually. I refuse to take sides even among the feminists who are advocating for surrogacy or against surrogacy. And I'm trying to make this a more complicated choice, even for surrogate mothers, because the truth of the matter is, it is racialized labor, after all, right? It is brown bodies of women who are having children for particularly people from the West or people who are from a upper class. And they're not. I mean, I know the recent trend on surrogacy, and I don't know if your viewers are reading this. Is India is trying to ban surrogacy. The banning surrogacy or banning sex work is not the answer. The answer lies in the way in which capitalism goes in and exploits systems that are cheaper, right? Because at the end of the day, if Indian women are not allowed to be surrogates, then these businesses will pop up somewhere else where the exchange rate is easier, and there are women who are willing to become surrogate mothers because they have children to feed or children to send to school, their daughters to get married, who need to get married, husbands who need to be taken care of. It's not as simple as just shutting down a business. It's much more complex than that. And recognizing that we have always used our bodies, to produce money, whether it is going to work or, in the case of sexual sex work, it is the body that enters into the market. In this case, it's the womb that's entering now into the market. So, how do we go in and find ways to protect these women, not by closing down the surrogate industry, but by recognizing that the only reason these women do this is because they're taking literally choices in their own hands, and it's for a better future for their children.
Yeah, and I think there's some people, I think, resist this type of thinking because you don't have absolute clarity on what is good, and you want an answer to, well, is if I'm really desiring to have a kid and I can't, and someone will be a surrogate mother and they will take care of their family, can provide education and all this kind of stuff. It's real easy to see how both individuals in that exchange would feel affirmed and valued, and how both of those individuals have almost no influence on whether the colonial relationship that made this kind of market relationship possible, what they can do about it. So you end up getting really overwhelmed, and so then they don't finish reading the book, or they go get someone else to preach the sermon, or they want some real simple answer, right? If we pass this law, it'll fix it. We ban surrogate mothers, good, we got ethics. Or you build a wall between two countries and it fixes all immigration problems. Or you get money out of politics because that's easy. And can you describe what it's like to how do you think and process things ethically and call out things prophetically when you know that the system itself isn't changing very quickly and everyone's culpable in different ways in different situations?
Correct. Yes, and oh man, that is such a tough. That is really, really, that was really hard for me to do, because when I was writing my own dissertation, I myself was struggling with not wanting to pass judgment. And that is hard because, as a person, I want to say certain things are right or certain things are wrong. And that's just our human nature. But recognizing that that's the easy way out. The easy way out is to pass the law, is to give a rule. The tougher way out is to sit and struggle with it and recognize that there are no easy answers. So, for example, it's a tough call, because if a couple wants to really have a child that is genetically their own, and a woman, in a third world country who comes from a poor background is willing to help, what's the problem? For me, the problem lies with the ways in which laws are created where the life of the surrogate mother is somehow deemed lesser than the child that she's carrying. So, for example, in the United States, a surrogate, a woman who signs up to be a surrogate mother can change her mind at the last minute. there are laws to protect her. The cost is also a lot more for a surrogate mother in this country. In India, it's cheaper, right? So it comes down to it basically comes down to dollars. It's cheaper to hire a surrogate in India. Yes, she gets a big house and whatever have you. You're also playing with the life of a surrogate mother, as I talk about in my own book, of an incident where when a surrogate mother, her life was in danger, and the choice was made to save her or the child. The doctors chose to save the child versus the mother. So at the end of the day, it's the way in which we are seeing the bodies of these women as, laborers with no humanity. To me, that is something that we really need to struggle with, and then figure out what's a way in which I don't think you can ever find a way in which everybody can be made happy. There will always be power differentiations in it, but the idea that I can go in and just pass a simple law and and that's going to fix all the problems, to me is very unrealistic, because all the law does is it makes people in power feel good about themselves. It's the people who don't have power and who are struggling day in and day out, they're still on the ends of losing, and their humanity is being questioned and deconstructed and dismantled day in and day out. So to me, yeah, I mean, I don't have the right answers. I just don't. But I would rather be there than to say, and so this is the reason why everybody drives off into the sunset. That's a very nice way to end the book. And I actually even thought about it, at one point, like, should I just give a concrete answer to my audience? And I decided against that, because I think that does a disservice to Mary also, because at the end of the day, once she has the child, where does she go? We don't know, right? So, I mean, we only see her during Christmas for Protestants, and then we forget about her till the next Christmas season is out. So, staying with the struggle, to me, is more real than going in and trying to fix the struggle and smooth it out so I can make myself feel better about going and helping these women and uplifting them.
Yeah. I was thinking, I was wondering what you thought about the end of the Gospel of John, where, from the cross, Jesus is, doing, I guess, the taking care of Mary. This is your son type of thing.
What do I think about the end of the gospel? I mean, I haven't really spent much time, I have to be honest with you, thinking about that part as of yet. But it also goes into this idea of wanting to show that Mary is playing an important role. But in the Gospel of John, like her motherhood is not as uplifted as much as you see in Matthew and Luke.
Yeah. In there, you don't get the infancy narratives, but you always get her as like mother, not as like womb. That the body of her is never really emphasized in John. It's the wedding at Cana, that kind of thing.
And Jesus also appears to her as an adult there, and the relationship also, you kind of see that it's almost as if they're on equal terms, especially in the wedding at Cana, and the way Mary is talking to Jesus. She has more authority, with Jesus when she's talking to him. Very different from what you see, again, like I say, Luke specifically, because in Matthew, I mean, Joseph also, does exactly what Mary does in Luke's gospel. Joseph goes in, and once he finds out that this child is going to give his people hope, he is totally okay accepting her. We often, again, smooth over Joseph's part, and we say, he's such a righteous guy. But if you actually, when you read the text, you realize he only says yes when he realizes that she is impregnated by the Holy Spirit. In the same way that the husbands of the surrogate women in India are totally okay with their wives carrying a child of another couple when they realize that the impregnation happens through a needle, versus the physical act. So it's a way in which, and that's why India is a great place where the balance of patriarchy and capitalism really come together. And even in Matthew, as long as Mary, it's the Holy Spirit and there's nothing else funky going on there, we're okay with it. So it's the way in which patriarchy is also maintained in Matthew's gospel.
So in Matthew's gospel, how do you understand the inclusion of the different women in the genealogy? Mm-hmm. I was thinking that they represent women with different types of power relationships to their bodies in relationship to men and patriarchy, and some in relationship to political power.
Yeah. So to me, I did a lot when I was doing my research for the five women in Matthew's gospel. That's Rahab, Ruth, Tamar, Bathsheba, and Mary. I really struggled with it, and every single scholar that I was reading, I was not finding a good answer. Because, some of them were talking about how these women have scandalous, they're participating in a very scandalous birth. And then here you have Mary who comes in and rights all their wrongs because, they took on actions that were very scandalous for that time. Others were saying things like, Mary's coming in and it's through Mary's body that God makes this fantastic miracle happen. But in all of those arguments that I was reading, it was again going back and pitting these women against each other, where the four women from the Hebrew Bible were seen as somehow deviant, and Mary somehow as the one who rights the wrong and somehow better. So she becomes like this goddess figure. So I was not really being convinced by those arguments. So to me, when I went and I started reading and I started doing my own exegesis, what I started to find out was, number one, all those four women were foreign women. They were connected through their foreignness. So that means within the Hebrew Bible also they would have been seen as racialized other women. That's one. Number two was that these women were all tricksters. They took matters in their own hands and they exploited the system that chose to exploit them. In the same way as I would argue that Mary falls in this line of women, not a trickster woman, but as a woman who is taking matters of her own agency in her hand. And to me, that becomes the point of connection. The same way in which, I have this great quote in my book about this woman who's a servant, and when she's interviewed she's the surrogate woman, when she's interviewed by a newspaper and they ask her about risks, she says, her response is, any fool can have a baby. It takes a smart woman to get paid for it. And that's where the agency of these women really comes out, is the way in which they go in and being foreigners, being outsiders, being on the margins, they're coming in and playing the system that chooses to exploit them. And that's what makes them, that's the connection for me in the genealogy.
Well, and I thought and maybe you could say a bit about it, but the way you even understand those stories really connects to how they're being used. And for example, the Bathsheba section, one of the difficulties in even drawing the connections you're doing is just how much violence we've managed to take out of the Bathsheba story. Right? I mean, most people don't, you don't have a lot of sermons called David was a rapist. But if you read the text, there's not really a whole lot of ways around it. So can you say how you see Mary's narrative and the politics of her body being part of this ongoing story in Scripture? Because as contemporary readers who are wanting to engage texts we treat as sacred, but with desires for a more equitable and just relationship to bodies, what do we do with things like that?
Well, I mean, yes, because that's the tough part, right? When you especially with Bathsheba is the hardest one because she is raped. But in the same sense, what I also want to really highlight when it comes to Mary is not to see her decision of wanting to be a mother for the other or to the other as somehow as this romantic notion, but read the text as this woman is literally opening up her body. So in the process of opening up her body, she is also violating her body, and it's a violent act, as anybody who's been a mom or who's gone through pregnancy or who's given birth will tell you that it is painful. And I mean, it's not violent, but it's definitely painful, and it's not pretty at all. And so in the sense that even with her wanting to be this mother, she is participating in a violence that is ultimately coming out of love for her people, love for the child that she's going to carry, and love for God. So it's, this idea that love and violence have to be seen as separate is what I'm trying to combine and talk about the ways in which women sometimes, even in contemporary contexts, have to make decisions about our bodies that are sometimes very, very difficult. Whether it is abortion, or whether it's wanting to have a child, or whether it's even the pain of never being able to have a child. That motherhood is not just about love. It's also about this sense of violence where our bodies open up, give life, and at the same time we are, it's an act of unconditional love, but at the same, an act of, exploitation, being exploited for love, as mothers. So I really try to play with these two words and really want to mess it up, because it helps to me, in my mind. What I'm trying to do is I'm really trying to go in and de-romanticize this idea of unconditional love, mother goddess figures, but see these women as real women who go in and are making decisions that are very, very tough. Connected back to Bathsheba, right? All these horrific things happen to her body, and yet she's never given a voice in the story. She just goes and has another child. She loses her child, but you don't hear anything. You hear of David's pain and David's sorrow, but you don't hear her voice. In the same way that you don't hear Mary's voice once the child, once Jesus is born, you don't hear her voice. In the same way that you don't hear the surrogate mother's voice once they have the children, right? So these are women who are performing love only knowing fully well, some of them, especially in the surrogate case, knowing fully well that they're violently cut out of the narrative and they're violently pushed back into the margins. So it's this idea of being conscious about their own violence and still having the guts to take the risk with their bodies over and over again. That was a long answer for you.
Oh, no. And it really got to one of the questions that I had kind of lingering in my mind, is how your engagement with Luke's infancy narrative and the the synth story, how that impacts the way you read the story in the garden for Jesus approaching his own death. Because there's some parallels, and there are a little between Jesus's own "not my will but thy will be done" type of thing, and it's very much a violent love event.
Yeah.
It's consciously chosen, but it's a conflicted decision, and in both of them, you have a young woman in a conquered territory and a homeless Jew in the conquered territory as the broken bodies for God's agenda. So, how does Attentive to Mary kind of change the way you read or understand the story of Jesus in Luke?
Luke is very interesting because Luke's Jesus, I would say, for the most part, is a very masculine Jesus, right? He's a very masculine Jesus. I actually see parallels with what I'm doing with Mark's Jesus and the conflict that Mark's Jesus has in the Garden of Gethsemane. And given the way in which Mark's Jesus is more, or appears to be, or is written as more human than Luke's Jesus. But you're right in the sense that, this idea of loving violence is also so much connected with the way in which martyrdom or narratives of martyrdom come into play, or sacrifice, for example. That's another this idea of sacrifice, knowing fully well, but being scared, being conflicted, recognizing the risks, and yet doing it because you're so convinced that this will bring you hope. I mean, hope is a very addictive thing for people who are oppressed. And in that sense, I think, in a way, Mary sets the precedent in Luke's gospel, that she takes a risk. She dares to imagine that her people will live a free life. She dares to imagine that. She has the audacity. And then you have Jesus who comes in and, he has the audacity to see that vision, to dream that vision, and to participate in that vision. And that's where I think love and violence really come into play. I mean, how much are you willing to push yourself? I mean, this is what makes me also a person of faith, because I always ask myself, how much am I willing to push myself in order that my future generations can have a better life? Not even the ones who are connected to me, but the future generation that comes after me. How much of a risk am I willing to take with my own politics, with my own voice, with my own body, that I can, that I would put myself out there because I know that my future will have a better life. And I think a lot of us would say we will put ourselves out there because it means that our children, our children's children, our future generations will have a better life. And that's what makes us human, right? The ability to dream and hope. Yeah.
Well, I think that's helpful because when you make the ethics of the situation ambiguous, when those binaries that you keep blurring and destroying of like hero and victim, or violence and love and mother and woman, and those type of things get broken, it is seeing where the energy and motivation and stuff goes for in those. It really helps, because I don't think any of us who are parents wouldn't choose some form of violent love if God's like, and here's the positive outcome for your kid. Like and you don't think it's immoral to make that decision, right? Like as much as there, and I wonder if the uncomfortability that people of privilege have in thinking about global situations like this is more connected to kind of a myth of purity that we have about the initial colonial violence, right? Like, and you talk about this in the book, that in Hart and Negri talk about it, like where when it goes to dealing with colonizing powers, there's this initial act of violence, and then the second movement is the responses that come after it. But the founding act of violence is usually narrated in these ways where you have like a myth of purity. You can start your narrative at a different place, so culpability's there, and the energy of cultivating ignorance and denial is pervasive. So you're never really reflecting about things ethically. You're more reflecting about things on the terms of preserving kind of the mythology and ideology around the kind of founding act of violence, which you probably weren't even around for. So you're already going to go ahead and distance yourself. But once you're able to put it in a specific enough narrative, be it a surrogate parent or Mary or Jesus or any of these people where you as a parent know, I would do that, then I think it's a way of inviting people of privilege into seeing the complexity and the interconnectedness and the humanity that still exists once you kind of get over that. I don't know. Once you get in touch with the reality of the situation, I don't know, maybe say something. In my head, I think I know what I'm thinking, but I'm not sure.
No, that's exactly right. Because that's why for me, reading Mary alongside the Indian surrogate mother was such an important. It was such an important exegetical move, because again, just exegeting Mary without the real life stories of these Indian women would have just left me talking about Mary's motherhood in the abstract. But when I take that experience and I connect it to real life bodies of women, something happens. We not only see the liberation of Mary and the liberation of these surrogate women, we also see the oppression of Mary and the oppression of these surrogate women. And we recognize that these terms are much more complicated than just binary terms that have to be played against each other. But there's something that is much more gray that is happening. So to me, that it drives the narrative home in the same way, as I said, it drives the narrative of Jesus home. Jesus goes on the cross because he is convinced that his action is going to bring justice to his people, and he does that. And wouldn't a good leader do that? Wouldn't a good parent do that? Wouldn't a good citizen, a global citizen, do that, right? And yes, and so, but the decisions we make are never pure, right? Just as our stories are never pure, and when we mess it up a little bit, that's when I think the hope really comes out. Of course, the sad part is, how much are we willing to give for that hope? And sometimes the answer is, we may never stop with trying. And I don't see that as a bad thing. It's a complicated thing. It's a troubling thing, but I don't see it as necessarily good or bad.
So, taking a step back from the book itself, I'm interested in how this type of biblical studies translates to a seminary classroom. So when you're sitting there and teaching the intro to New Testament classes to a preacher who's like, well, I guess I should get one of those degrees in Oklahoma, and these conversations are going to be extremely foreign, and they may have half the Bible memorized. Like, what is it like to like, how do you understand your role as a professor where you could have, from country preacher to like online student who's there for the Masters of Social Justice, and it's like, come on, let's get to the postcolonial theory. I'm ready. Like, you're going to have you have a hugely diverse student group. Yeah. And then you're introducing the New Testament, but underneath it, there's like where your passion and heart is and kind of particular focus academically is. So how does that look in, in
a classroom?
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So one of the things for me, I think personally as a New Testament scholar, is to always read texts and contextualize them. I always have to read biblical text and find ways to make connections with the lives that we live today. So whether it is surrogacy in this case, or it is immigration, or the election that we're having right now, or the issue of capitalism or empire, I always find ways that we can talk about how this text translates in our contemporary context. And I ask my students to make those connections with me, not just by themselves. And we're sitting there talking about, for example, if we're talking about, I'm going to go with Mark because I just finished my lecture on Mark's Jesus. And we talk about Mark's Jesus as being this human Jesus who is given the title Son of God. And for most of the students, they think, okay, Son of God, that's, God's Son. And then introduce them to the idea that the term Son of God was actually a political term. It was a term that was used used for the Roman Empire. And what is Mark doing? He is going in there and he is he is playing the system, if you will. He is using his power to resist empire in ways that are subversive, and introducing to students that they too have the power in their own context to be subversive. That being subversive is actually not a bad thing. I once preached a sermon called "Are we ready to accept the Savior unconditionally?" And I talk about how Jesus is a very subversive character in the Gospels, and recognizing that introducing students to the global context, they can even do that in their own context. Of course, you often you get some of the students who will say, well, Dr. Jacob, this whole thing about surrogacy is really great, but, I'm in rural Oklahoma and people don't even know, they don't know anything about a country called India. Does that mean we shouldn't talk about it? We have to, because the world is getting smaller. So how do you introduce it to them? In the same way that the Gospels introduce Jesus to us, subversively, right? You trick the system. Once you introduce these ways of thinking within a congregation, within the context that you're in, justice is, I believe, social justice is very infectious. And once you're hooked on it, right, there's no looking back, because you really, it's the passion of wanting to better the situations around you, wanting to fight for what is right, that fuel the passions of how we read the New Testament. So I'm very, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to do it very subversively in my classroom, introducing them to the study of the New Testament. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun, and
you should take my class.
I'm very excited about getting to be out there in Tulsa in 3 or 4 weeks. So
yeah,
we will have some fun in person. And
yes.
Yeah. So the last thing is, what's been your favorite part about teaching at Phillips?
Well, let's see. My favorite part is definitely the students. I love teaching in a school where the students are so engaged. And again, I mean, I haven't been in Tulsa that long. I just came here last year I was brought on as the faculty of the New Testament position. And, my predecessors were people with really big names, like Dr. Brandon Scott and Dr. Dennis Smith. And then here I am, the nobody who, the fresh-faced graduate who shows up. And I was so pleasantly surprised by all my myths about Tulsa and Oklahoma breaking right in front of me. And I was very excited about it. Teaching students that and serving with faculty that are so passionate for justice actually made me feel right at home within the school. I also felt like this is great, teaching people who want to know more about the world. luckily, I've never had resistance where, somebody said, just teach me the basics of the New Testament so I can go preach in my church. I've always had students who have said, wow, that was something we did not know about a part of the world. Or we did not know the ways in which colonialism has affected so much of our lives, or we did not know this about immigration. So it's really fun to teach a group of students who are so enthusiastic about that.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk, and I am looking forward to sharing this episode and letting people know about what you're doing, and peer pressuring them into buying the book.
Yes, please go out and buy. And I hope our paths cross again. And like I said, you should come and sit in on my class, and then you can add to the conversation, because this has been great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Trip.